What's up, guys? Joe here at schoolofmotion.com, and welcome to day 10 of 30 days of After Effects. We are a third of the way through. It's kind of mind-blowing. I want to thank the Department of Motion Design at the Ringling College of Art and Design for sponsoring this, and please check out the contest they're sponsoring, which I think is really, really cool, and it's a great opportunity for someone who's trying to break into the business to get some exposure and get some professional feedback on their work, which is invaluable. I also want to thank my good friend Matt Nabashek for drawing this cute Boston Terrier that I've used in this scene. And what we're going to talk about in the first part of a two-part tutorial is how to set up a scene so it feels like a 3D environment when it's actually not so easy to do that based on an illustration or something like that. In a previous tutorial, we talked about how to make a 3D environment from a photo. We're going to do this kind of the same thing here, but we're going to do it in a very different way, and we're going to go into Cinema 4D just for a little bit, and we're going to use Cineware, the link between Cinema 4D and After Effects, to create the environment, okay? So this is really cool, and I hope you guys learned something from this. So let's hop in and get started. So first I want you guys to just notice a couple things here, because again, this is a two-part tutorial, and in this first part we're going to talk about the environment, and the second part we'll talk about the dog. But as far as the environment goes, I want you to look at the floor specifically, all right? This environment, it feels like a 3D environment. The floor is kind of lying flat, and the camera's not moving too extreme, but you know, if you look closely, you can see that the walls have perspective on them, and this feels like a 3D room. And you know, in another tutorial in this 30 Days of After Effects series, I showed you guys how to take an existing image and sort of warp it in After Effects to make a 3D scene. Well, today I'm going to show you a different way, and this is actually the first time I've tried it, and it worked out pretty great, and I figured it would be a neat thing to show you guys, and it uses one of the newest features of After Effects, which is called Cineware. Alright, so ignore the dog and what he's doing. We will talk about him in the next tutorial, but for this tutorial, I want to talk about the room. Let's hop into Photoshop for a minute, and let's look at the Photoshop file. First of all, again, I want to give a shout out to Matt Nabashek, who is an incredible illustrator and a dear, if not kind of warped friend of mine. And he's an illustrator, and this dog, he's probably been drawing this dog since he was 5. And I love the way it looked, and I thought it would be great. So I asked him to borrow it, and he let me do it. But the room and everything else in this scene, I just created in Photoshop, okay? And it's really simple shapes. There's some textures on it, and all I tried to do was create this kind of warped looking room, right? And I used a few composition tricks. If you notice, the lines all kind of point to the dog, and then I'm kind of focusing on the dog, right? But ignoring all that, this room is very simple, right? And if you know some basic Photoshop, you can make something like this. And I knew this would be a great environment for the dog, but I wanted to be able to make this room feel three-dimensional. And you know, I kind of intentionally made the lines a little askew, and you know, there's no right angles, and perspective wise this really makes no sense. It's just a stylized illustration. So if you want to turn something like this into a 3D layer, or sorry, a 3D scene, it's tricky because After Effects works really well when you have 3D layers that can kind of be aligned in a certain way and sort of make a room. But when things are all over the place, it's kind of tricky. And so there's a really sweet trick I'm going to show you guys, okay? And all it requires is that you know a little bit of Cinema 4D, and then I'll show you how to make this work in After Effects. So again, I know this is 30 days of After Effects, but we're gonna go into Cinema 4D just for a minute, okay? So don't fret. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We are going to hop into Cinema 4D. Now, if you have After Effects Creative Cloud, you have Cinema 4D, okay? Now, you may not have the full version. I'm on Cinema 4D R15, but if you don't own that, you do own Cinema 4D Lite, okay? So that's what you'll open Cinema 4D Lite. All right, and here's what we're gonna do. First thing we need to do is we need to load in, what I wanna load in is this layer right here, okay? You know, if you want, I'll post this Photoshop file, you guys can take a look at it, but this room is just made up of a bunch of shapes, right? And if you go through, I've got my kind of background color, and then I've got kind of like a shadow color with a little texture, and then the floor with kind of like a little kind of highlight color to it and some more texture. And then I put some stripes on the wall. Okay, that's all it is, just a bunch of junk in Photoshop. And what I did was I then just copied, and if you guys don't know this trick, this is really cool. You hit Command A to select all. You hit Shift Command C, right? So instead of Command C, it's Shift Command C. What that actually does is it does a copy merged command, which copies literally whatever is on this canvas, right? And then when you hit Paste, it pastes a layer that looks exactly like whatever your comp looks like. So that's what I did. And I did that so I could have one layer in my Photoshop file called Room Copy that contained my entire background. Back in Cinema 4D, what we're going to do is we're going to add a background object. Okay, and again, if you've never used Cinema 4D, I apologize for dragging you into this mess. Just follow along. I'm going to try and explain it as though you're someone that's never even opened this program before. Okay, so up here, this top bar, this is kind of the basic tools that you use. And what you're looking for is this button right here, right? It kind of looks like a perspective floor. And if you click and hold the mouse, it shows you a bunch of objects that you can add that are sort of environmental things. And we want the background object, okay? And all that background object does is it lets us load in an image that we can then use as reference. I also want to make sure I set up our Cinema 4D project so that it's going to match our After Effects projects. So this button here looks like a little clapboard and a gear. You click that. First set your resolution, right? Pretty straightforward. Width 1920, height 1080. Down here where it says frame rate, let's set this to 24. All right. And then we have to do one more thing, okay? Because this is one of those dumb things with Cinema 4D. You set the frame rate here, and that's not all you have to do. You have to actually set it in two places. The second place, if I close this and I hold Command and hit D, that brings up the project settings, all right? Those also live in the Edit menu, Project Settings. And you need to go here where it says FPS and set that to 24. Okay, now we are set up. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to load that background image onto this background object. In order to do that, I need a material. So down here at this bottom kind of area here, this is where your materials live. Right now, we don't have any. So let's hit the Create button, say New Material, and now we've got a material, okay? And we don't even need to rename this. Let's just come over here. Whatever you click on in Cinema 4D, the options for that thing show up right here. So let's click on that material. Come over here, this little tab here, this is showing you kind of what options on your material are enabled at the moment. If you click on the basic tab, you can disable and enable more options. And I want to disable everything except this one, luminance, okay? And I won't get too far into it, but the reason it's luminance is not affected by lighting, okay? It's gonna remain like a flat shaded thing no matter what's going on, and that's what we want for this particular example. So we've enabled luminance. We get a luminance tab down. If we click on that, we can go to this texture area, click this giant bar here, and we can now load in our image, okay? So there's a few steps so far, but they're all very simple, and hopefully you can pause the video and follow along. All right, so now let's load in our Photoshop file, okay? So I'm gonna load it in, all right? When this message pops up, I generally hit no, and maybe at some point I'll explain what that means. I don't feel like getting into it right now, but I've loaded in my Photoshop file into the material, and now I can click and drag this material right onto my background, and if I don't miss, there it is, okay? Now I don't want to see the dog and the shadow and all that stuff. I only want to see that layer that had my room on it, and Cinema 4D is a great way to do that. If I click on that material again, right, and I see my luminance tab highlighted with my file loaded in, if I click on that file name, I now have some options that I can mess with. And one of them is this layer set option. So I'm going to click that, and I'm just going to, what's great, Cinema 4D can actually read Photoshop files. And it's pretty powerful actually what you can do. You can even see like my layer groups here come through, right? But all I care about is this room copy layer, so I'm going to select that and hit OK. And now that's the only layer I'm seeing. Beautiful, okay? And this background object, it will just kind of show through so I can use it as reference, okay? So real quick Cinema 4D lesson. if you look at the number key, like the top row of numbers on your keyboard, put your left hand ring finger over the 1, and then let your middle finger fall over the 2 and your index finger fall over the 3. 1, if you click and hold it, moves you around. 2 zooms in and out. 3 rotates the scene, okay? So what I want to do is create a cube. All right, and this will all make sense in a minute, right? Practice moving around the cube. And I'm gonna, as soon as I click this little button that looks like a cube, it makes a cube. Cube shows up over here. And now if I select that cube, I've got some options, right, related to the cube. I can scale it up, I can move it around. And what I wanna do is go to the basic tab and hit X-ray. And that's just gonna let me see through this cube. All right, and those of you who have used Cinema 4D may already know where this is going. The next thing I wanna do is select this cube and hit this button over here, okay? And if I hold the mouse over it, it says make editable. And really, all you need to know, if you're unfamiliar with Cinema 4D, is that some objects are called parametric objects. And what that means is you can click on them and you get this nice little object tab, and it lets you really easily stretch them out and do neat things like round out the edges and stuff like that. We don't give a crap about any of that right now. What we want to do is be able to pick this corner here and move it around, and then pick this corner and move it around. To do that, you have to turn this into a polygon object. Here's the button right here, it does it. Or you can hit the C key on your keyboard, it does the same thing. Now we have that. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna now switch into polygon mode. Okay, so by default, anything you do is going to affect the entire cube. If you want to work on individual pieces of the cube, you've got these 3 buttons here: point, edge, polygon. I'm gonna go into polygon mode. I'm gonna make sure I have this tool selected right here, this one with the orange circle. That is my selection tool. Make sure the cube is selected here, and then I can, you can see it. I can highlight individual faces of that cube, and I'm gonna select this one, right? I'm gonna hold Shift, and I'm also gonna select this one and this one. Then I'm gonna hit Delete. Okay. Now, if you couldn't guess what I was doing before, you can probably guess what I'm doing now, okay? I'm going to recreate this room using this 3D object, okay? So what I need to do is I need to match this as closely as I possibly can, all right? So first thing I want to do is add a camera to the scene. There's a big button right here, looks like a camera. That's probably the one you want to click, so let's click that, and what do you know, it looks like a camera, okay? If you want to look through that camera, you need to make sure this tiny little crosshair is checked. So right now it's not. So when we're moving around our scene like this, we're actually not moving the camera. And in fact, if I zoom out, you can see, and it's kind of faint because the color of the camera is very light, but you can see the camera sitting right there. If I click this crosshair, whoosh, now we zoom in. Now if I move around using those 1, 2, 3 keys, we are actually moving the camera, and that's what we want to do, okay? So what I want to do is I'm looking at this corner of the room right here, and I want to line it up with that corner of the image. Cool? And now what I want to do is I want to just try and match this room up as closely as I can. Okay, I'm not going to be able to get it anywhere near perfect, but that's okay. I just want to get it close. And one thing that would really help is if I could kind of rotate the camera, kind of like cant it a little bit to the left. So an easier way to do that is to click on the camera, and you get this giant menu here of all your camera options. But if you click this coordinates button, every object, with some exceptions, has a coordinates tab that lets you sort of manually, adjust the exact XYZ and rotation. And I'm just going to adjust this B value. In Cinema 4D, it's different than After Effects. It doesn't use XYZ rotation. It uses HPB, which stands for heading, which kind of makes sense if you think of it like an airplane, right? You're heading this way or this way. The pitch, right, up and down, and then the bank. And the bank is the one we're looking for, and we want to bank this thing just a little bit like that. Move the camera. I'm holding the 1 key, and I'm banking. I'm just trying to get it close. We're not trying to get it exactly right here, okay? That's the next step. Cool, so here we are. So I'm sort of gonna like spill the beans here. What we're gonna do is we're actually going to take this texture and we're gonna project it literally like it's coming out of a projector and stick it to this, this inside of a cube that we've created. And so in order to do that, you actually need a camera in the right position. So this camera that we created is actually going to act like a projector. And so now I'm at the point where it's lined up close enough, right? And now I'm actually going to start changing the shape of the cube, but I want to make sure I don't accidentally nudge that camera around, okay? Because it's lined up pretty nicely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click or control click on this camera. And that opens up this, big long list of things that you can do. Just look for Cinema 4D tags protection, okay? And all that does is it makes it so you can't accidentally move your camera. Wonderful. If you do need to move your camera around just to see something, click this little crosshair, and now you can move your, you have something called an editor camera, which is a camera that doesn't render. It just lets you move around your scene and see what's going on. But this camera is actually a real camera that's sitting in your scene. And what you want to do is look through this camera, click on this cube, and you see, remember when we went into polygon mode? Go into point mode now, right? Select this point, and now I want you to move that point way out here, okay? And what I want to do is move that point so it is actually lined up with this line here on the floor of my background image. All right, and so now I can't actually see that point anymore because I've kind of moved it off the screen. So what I'm going to do is click this button right here, okay? If you click this, this brings up your 4 views, right? If you've ever used a 3D program, this should make sense to you. You got your perspective view, you're looking through the camera, top, front, and right. And so I have that point selected, and I can't see it in this view, but I can see it in every other view. And what I want to do is scoot it kind of towards the camera so that it lines up with with this edge here. And so I'm going to come to my top view, and I'm just going to kind of scoot it forward like that. Okay, then I'm going to grab this point and I'm going to scoot it over so it's kind of, I can look in the top view and see it's kind of parallel to that, but I also want to scoot it up higher. So in my front view, I'm going to scoot it up higher. Okay, and I know I'm doing this really quickly, and really the truth is it just takes a while working in a 3D app to be able to kind of do this without having to think about it. I know, it's not really this easy to do when you start using 3D, but eventually you will get the hang of it. I promise you. All right. So I moved that point. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold Shift, and I'm also gonna click. Oh, see, I did it wrong. I'm gonna click this bottom point here. Let's see. Let me figure this out. Yeah, so that's the point, right? Cool. All right, I want that point. I also want this point here, and I want to grab the handles, right? I want to push these things forward a little bit like this. Okay, cool. All right, so now let me and now here's a little gotcha. If you've never used Cinema 4D, if you don't have the cube selected, you won't be able to move the point. So make sure you have it selected, and then you can manipulate the points. And what I'm doing is I'm moving a point, but I'm looking over here, okay? And I want to line up with that edge of my reference image. Now I'm going to click this point, and I want to move it up in the air, and I can just scoot it over like this, okay? And now if I click this button again in this view, I can really get a good view. And it's amazing. I mean, it didn't take long, but now you can see that we've pretty much lined up that cube with our reference image. So let's click on this crosshair on the camera and just kind of take a look, right? And I know it's a little distracting having the background image, but you can kind of see that what we've created is this warped kind of funny shaped little room, right? But because we were looking through this camera when we did that, we lined it up perfectly. So now here's the fun part. What I want to do is take this, see this little icon here? When I made a material and I dragged it onto the background, what it did was it made this little guy. This is called a texture tag. And a texture tag in Cinema 4D, it just assigns a material to an object, and I'm going to move that so it's now assigned to the cube. Okay? And you can actually delete the background object now. You don't have to, but you don't need it anymore as long as you've done everything right, okay? And then the next thing you want to do, right? So right now, if I don't look through my camera and I just kind of move around like this, you can see it doesn't look right, okay? The reason for that is because we have to tell this texture tag, look, the way I want you to put this material on this cube is actually by projecting it through this camera right here, okay? So what I'm going to do is select that tag. Remember, whatever you select shows up here, and change this projection to camera mapping, and you see the texture disappear. That's because it needs to know what camera to use. So you click that camera and you drag it into that little camera slot, and boom, look at that, okay? And now if I look around, you can see I've actually got this texture mapped on there. Now it's not working perfectly, right? So let's fix it. But the way you can tell is you can see that here's the wall and here's the wall. We're kind of seeing some of the wall on the floor. So something isn't lined up quite right, okay? But that's okay. Now, one thing that helps in this situation is if you had a little bit better detail in your texture while you're previewing it. So what you can do is click on your material here, go to this editor tab, and where it says texture preview size, change that from default to like this one, right? 1024 by 1024, and now it's a lot sharper. Okay, so that helps. So let's look through this camera again. Let's try and figure out what's going on. If I click on this cube, and now, oh, I know what I did wrong. Oh, I almost led you guys down the wrong path. There's one step I forgot. When you put the material on the cube and you say camera mapping and then you throw that camera on there, you got to click this button, calculate. If you don't click that button, bad things happen. So now I click the button and look what happened. Now we are pretty good to go, right? So I just clicked on this crosshair so we could look through our editor camera, and lo and behold, we've got a pretty solid little 3D room there. Pretty neat, right? Cool. All right, so far this has been a Cinema 4D tutorial, which is not what you guys signed up for. So let me do one more thing, okay? In After Effects, when we use this 3D scene, we are going to have a small problem, okay? And and really what the problem is I'm gonna wanna put the dog right on the floor. In order to put the dog on the floor, I need to know where the floor is. And the problem, if we look through our front view here, is that the floor, here's the floor, it's this bottom edge right here. It's actually below the 0 line. This red line here, this is the 0 line, which means the floor in After Effects world might be, you know, it might be like 372 or something weird, and we're not going to know where exactly the floor is. So what I could do, what I probably should do, is I'm going to actually move the camera and the cube at the same time so I can move that floor up to the 0 line. Now I had if you guys remember, because I paused the video and now I'm screwing things up, I had this protection tag on the camera, and if I try to grab both of these and move them, I'm going to have a problem. The problem is the camera is not allowed to move because I have that little tag on there. So what I'm going to do is just grab the tag and I'm going to temporarily scoot it onto this background, okay? I'm going to go into my front view and I'm going to grab both the camera and the cube and I'm just going to scoot them up, right? And if you look over here, you can see that everything's staying lined up. Everything looks great. And I'm going to zoom in and I'm just going to try and get this thing close, okay? It's not super important that it's totally accurate. Now, there's way more accurate ways to do that, by the way. I don't want to make this tutorial any more Cinema 4D-esque than it has to be. All right, so another thing we can do, which is really smart, is to add a null object. So you guys all know there's null objects in After Effects. Well, they're in Cinema 4D too. So if I click on this cube and I hold the mouse down, I get all of these nice objects I can add, and one of them is a null. And I'm just going to call this dog ref. And I'm going to go into my 3D views here, and I'm going to click on dog ref, and I just want to make sure that it's on the floor. And not only is it on the floor, but I want to make sure that it's kind of where I want that dog, right? And I want him kind of in this corner here, just like that, okay? Okay, so here's my camera, and I'm going to put the protection tag back on this camera, so I can't move it, and I'm going to rename this camera projection, okay? Just so it's clear what's going on. And now we're all set up, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this file. And we're going to save this as Room C4D Demo. Excellent. Now we go into After Effects. And, you know, the great thing about Cineware is it's just stupid how easy it is, right? Let's make a new comp. We're going to call this Room Demo. And I have a Cinema 4D folder in all of my After Effects projects, so I can just import right into that folder, that Room C4D Demo. And the Cinema 4D project just comes right in as a file. I'm going to click and drag it right into here. Okay? Now don't worry about this yet, okay? I know it doesn't look right. So the first thing you want to do is hit extract, right? When you have a Cinema 4D object, like in your timeline, it automatically has this Cineware effect on it. There's a whole bunch of buttons and things you can do. This extract button is super important. What it does is when you click it, it grabs any cameras and any objects that are in your Cinema 4D scene that you want to bring through to After Effects. Now, all it's brought over is the camera, and that's because I forgot a very important step. We're going to head back into Cinema 4D just for a second. This dog ref null is right where I want it, but After Effects can't see it. And the reason it can't see it is because I need to right-click on it, go to Cinema 4D tags, and add an external compositing tag, okay? I'd like to apologize briefly for how much Cinema 4D I'm forcing into you guys on a 30 days of After Effects tutorial. All right, so I saved the Cinema 4D project. I jumped back into After Effects. I can immediately now just hit extract. And you see now we get the camera called projection and dog ref. And that null, if you look, the anchor point is exactly where we want it to be. Now, why does this look wrong? Well, it basically looks wrong because by default, when you bring a Cinema 4D project into After Effects, this render setting here, the render is set to software. And it does that so that you can preview things a little bit more quickly. It's not fast, right? Cineware does not render things very quickly, but it can be useful for simple things like this. When you're ready to render for real, you can switch the renderer to standard final or standard draft. We set it to either one. You can see now it matches our Cinema 4D scene, okay? But if I take this projection camera and I move it, nothing happens, right? You can see the null move, right? The null is in the right spot, but the scene doesn't change. Where this gets really, really cool is if you click on your Cinema 4D layer and you go to the camera settings and you change it from Cinema 4D camera to comp camera. And at first nothing changes because we already copied the camera out of Cinema 4D into After Effects, right? So this camera matches exactly the Cinema 4D camera. The difference is now, if I move this, it will re-render our scene, and this is not zooming in a 2D layer. This is actually rotating the 3D camera inside of Cinema 4D and giving us a real-time sort of 3D view of that scene. And because of the way we set this up, right? Remember, this is actually a 3D room now. We've taken our 2D Photoshop file, which doesn't have any kind of real perspective or anything like that. You couldn't physically build this room very easily in After Effects. In Cinema 4D, it wasn't that hard because you can project that image onto a cube and move the points around. And now in After Effects, you have a live camera, right? And let me set this, so it's already set to third resolution, so it'll render a little bit quicker than full. And you can keyframe it, and you can create a camera animation and get a real, like not real time, but you guys know what I'm saying. You can get like almost instantaneous feedback, and this is actually literally a 3D room. You can go a lot deeper with Cineware too. I mean, obviously, if you had 3D lights in the scene or 3D objects in the scene, those would render too. The problem I have found is that Cineware is it's pretty slow, right? You can see even with third resolution here, trying to preview this, it's not that fast, but man, does that look great because it's actually 3D. And I mean, this is a fun thing to do. You've got this thing you just completely made up, and now it's, in like 15 minutes, it's like a 3D room you're in, all right? And what's awesome is, here, let me come in here. This is my Photoshop file, and I have this dog as kind of a layer. Everything's not separated out yet, but I do have this dog. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the anchor point to like his bottom foot, okay? I'm going to make it a 3D layer, and I'm going to parent it to this dog ref null that came through, okay? Now that it's parented, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero out the position. So I'm going to hit P and I'm going to zero out the position. And actually, I'm not going to zero it out, and I'll tell you why. When you bring a null in from Cinema 4D, right? If I click on this null, see where the anchor point is? The anchor point is not at 0, 0, 0 on this null. I know this is confusing. The 0, 0 point on a null is actually the top left corner. So the middle of the null is actually 50-50. So I actually need to type in 50-50. There we go. So you can see now the dog's foot, which is where I put the anchor point, is right on that null. And if I scale that dog down, okay, and I'm going to hit R on the dog, make sure the rotation's zeroed out. And now I know that dog is on the floor, and I'm going to scoot him over a little bit. And I'm just going to do a quick RAM preview just to make sure everything's working. Let's make this 2 seconds long. And let's do a quick shift RAM preview and see what we got. And it looks like the dog is sticking to the floor pretty well, okay? And the more accurately you position the null, the more accurately you position the anchor point of the dog, and all that, the better off it's going to stick. But even with that quick little job, all right, that's not bad. And we've got a fully 3D room. Right now, when you do a camera projection like this, you can't move the camera too far, right? Because if I look this way, right, I start to lose the artwork. So this works best if you don't have too far of a camera move. But if you make your artwork high res enough, you can do some pretty interesting camera moves with it. And what's great is you can just do it in After Effects now, and you don't have to like render out the 3D part, bring it into After Effects, try and get it to work together. And then if you decide to change the camera move, go back into Cinema 4D. You don't have to do that. It's awesome. And using that little camera projection trick, you can make whatever we want. Make the room look exactly how you want. And if I went to Photoshop right now and I added a picture right here, it would show up instantly because Cinema 4D would update, After Effects would update. The whole thing's live. It's pretty slick. So I hope you guys like this trick. I know it was probably 90% Cinema 4D and then 10% After Effects, but the 10% After Effects is kind of what makes the thing awesome because, I mean, man, you could even come in here to this camera and you could change the type of camera it is and make it like a wide angle lens, right? And really, change the whole look of the scene and get like all kinds of crazy looks, right? Here, let me make this like a 15 millimeter lens, right? And now you gotta zoom that camera way in, but you can see you're gonna get all kinds of crazy perspective distortion now. And you can just kind of quickly like preview what it looks like. Now this, I gotta say this isn't perfect. And I'm sure that with future versions of After Effects, it's gonna be a lot more real time and it's gonna give you a lot quicker feedback. You guys can see kind of how laggy it is, but look, there's a wide angle lens, and as long as I move the mouse slowly, there you go. This does go faster, by the way, if you click on the Cinema 4D layer and set the renderer back to software, right? That does help. You can also click Keep Textures in RAM. That speeds things up, and you can click on I don't think it's going to work too well in this case. If I click wireframe, you can still kind of see the edge of the cube, but it just doesn't give you as much feedback. But you can see how much faster the After Effects viewer updates. Let's try box. Yeah, it didn't really help too much either. But there's some settings here that can make your previews faster, right? This is actually a little bit easier to work with. And then you just switch back to standard, draft, or final. And there you go. Woo! I hope that was helpful. I hope you guys got some cool ideas out of this. And those of you that can draw, that are good illustrators, I have a feeling this is going to be very useful for you. So thank you guys very much. In the next tutorial for this scene, I'm going to show you how I animated the dog using follow through with also some cool expression tips because I just can't help myself. Thank you guys so much. I will catch you next time on 30 Days of After Effects.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that was cool, and I hope that that technique is something that maybe you haven't thought of doing before. The link between Cinema 4D and After Effects is extremely powerful. It's also kind of new, and it's a little bit buggy, but it's gonna get better. And it definitely opens up opportunities to really have full 3D things inside of After Effects in a way that wasn't possible before. I also want to thank the Department of Motion Design at the Ringling College of Art and Design for sponsoring this. An amazing place, very good friends of mine. Please check them out if you're interested in getting a really amazing, intense 4-year motion design program. Also, if you like this tutorial, if you like School Motion, please join the mailing list. Please tell other people, share these tutorials on Facebook. It really helps us get the word out, and it's gonna make it a lot easier to do stuff like this in the future. So thank you guys so much. The next tutorial will be part 2 of this video, and I will see you then.